I usually don't prepare my speeches, but I am overtaken by emotion as I have known Pope Shenouda for 25 years in a very close relationship. And seldom did he come to the United States without spending 3 or 4 days in our house, during which we got the greatest blessing ever. We are here to mourn the immense loss of this great man who will be remembered in history as one of the greatest popes in the history of the Coptic Church. It's hard to know exactly where to begin when talking about His Holiness and his accomplishments. What Pope Shenouda managed to achieve in the 41 years that we were blessed having him as our spiritual leader would have taken centuries for others to achieve. I cannot believe that he's no longer with us and that I can no longer confide in him and call on his wisdom, guidance, and teachings as I have for the past 25 years of our relationship. Even in legal matters, and His Holiness was not a lawyer, he was a great person to give advice on how to solve complicated legal matters. I often told that he considered me a son, having a lot of affection and trust in me, and similarly, I don't consider him like a father, but I consider him as my father. I consider the confidence and trust that he placed in me as the cornerstone of my professional and personal life. It was my greatest privilege and honor to have had countless private discussions with His Holiness, during which I received great blessing that no one could ever hope to receive in his life. Before I touch on some of the wonderful characteristics of our beloved Pope, I want to let you know that I just returned home yesterday from Egypt after attending His Holiness' funeral and at the request of Bishop Bachomius, who is a caretaker of the Patriarch now. He asked me to remain and accept the condolences of the dignitaries who came to mourn the death of His Holiness. I saw an outpouring of emotion that I can never imagine in my life. Many people in Egypt said that this reminded them that this was, the same kind of emotion that they saw after the death of President Nasser. And others called this the funeral of the century. And the love was so true that I saw, for instance, some veiled Muslim woman sitting on the sidewalk with the picture of the Pope carried by them and weeping in sadness over his death. Let me turn to some point that touched my heart as well as the hearts of my family, as we were blessed to have him as a guest in our house on most of his trips to the US. He was a man of charity and compassion. He told me several times that he considered his life to have begun when he started to devote 1 day a week on Thursday to meet with the poor and needy and personally deliver to them the gifts to handle their urgent needs. One of his main concerns was to help young women about to be married with getting a start on their life by providing them with furniture, kitchen, appliances, and all the like. I attended 2 of these weekly meetings, and I was so touched that I couldn't hold back my tears with how generous and humble it was for a Pope to devote 5 to 6 hours each week to personally listen and attend to the needs of his people. For His Holiness to consider the start of these weekly meetings as the beginning of his life was a strong lesson in charity, compassion, and humility, which helped shape my understanding of the purpose of this life and is a lesson that I will never forget. The other characteristic of His Holiness that was very apparent was his wit and sense of humor. He had an infectious laugh with a playful twinkle in his eye, and when the mood struck him, as it often did, he would rattle off jokes that would leave us in tears. When he became close with Sheikh Sha'rawi, who started to enjoy His Holiness books and read them, at the late stage of his life, and I'm using this just as an example. They met together once. They were greeting President Mubarak, and Sheikh Sha'rawi asked him, "What is your last book?" So he told him, "My last book I didn't write yet. Perhaps you meant my most recent book." So His Holiness smiled, and this is the kind of person he was. And having been appointed the Bishop of Education prior to becoming Pope, the importance he placed on education has been demonstrated by his insistence that any priest he ordained must have at least a bachelor's degree. Many of our priests have master's degrees and PhDs. I don't want to take much of your time, but I can never stop talking about His Holiness. And I will just end up with the great love that he has for the youth, and his great encouragement to get them involved. He used to say, "A church without youth is a church without future." And later he would also say, "A youth without church is a youth without future." I fondly remember him teaching my daughter in our house how to write and read the Coptic language when she was 12 years old. I still have these papers, which I will treasure all my life. We are blessed to have him lay the cornerstone of an orphanage that my daughter is building in Egypt, and his prayers and support will go far in its success. When His Holiness would stay with us in our home, we would always give him our bedroom as his quarters. One morning, we were surprised and very touched to see that he carefully placed two large icons above our bed that we treasure to this day. One of his most favorite sentences is, "God is present." God is present indeed and must be rejoicing with us all in heaven at welcoming our beloved Pope Shenouda into her bosom. I still feel his presence in my home and in my life, and even though I will continue to benefit from his wisdom and his words for the rest of my days, I will dearly, as we all will dearly miss him.